Hi everyone, thanks for coming back for part two. So there was a crossing over of this pattern of the Hebrew years alternating from 77 to 27 with the first coming of Christ, because it was in the Gregorian year 27 that Christ came as the Messiah when he began his ministry in 27 AD. But there's a crossing over from the pattern of the Gregorian calendar in terms of Jubilees. If you subtract the 40 years, which is a generation, if you go backwards and you subtract 40 years, it takes you to 1977. And that reminds me of this article over here that I talked about some time ago when I was talking about the importance of the number 27. And I just thought it was interesting where they mentioned over here that the movie Oh God was made in the year 1977, and in it says the part of God was played by George Burns, and he was in room 2700 on the 27th floor. So I thought that was really interesting that they had both the numbers 77 and 27. So it's like they knew those numbers were significant when they made that movie. And there's another crossing over with the birth of Christ, the Hebrew year. I was just curious what the Hebrew year for that would be. And as you can see, it's year 3761 because there's no year 0 on the Gregorian calendar, so you have to put in year 1. And so it turns out to be 3761. And for some reason, I'm not sure why, but I had put in what happened Hebrew year 3761. I'm not sure why I was searching that, but I came up with this article over here that says this day in Jewish history, and they're talking about BC here in 3761 BC. They're saying this is when they believe the world was created. And so of course that would make sense because on our calendar it would be year 0 when Jesus was born, and so 3761 years before that would be the date of creation. But it would also be year 0 on the Hebrew calendar. So for them it was year 0 that year, the year of creation, and for us it would have been BC 3761, and for us it would have been year 0 when Jesus was born, but for them that was Hebrew year 3761. But what I also thought was interesting is if you add those numbers together, the 3 plus the 7 plus the 6 plus the 1, you get the number 17. And as I said earlier, the Jubilee years on our calendars alternate between the years 17 and 67, and on the Hebrew calendar they alternate between the years 27 and 77. And so now I want to show you how this prophecy works out in Jubilees. And I'm going to start with this part over here where it says there will be 7 weeks or 7 sevens to the coming of the Messiah. So that would be 50 times 49 Jubilees. That makes 2,450 years. So if you subtract 2,450 years from 2017, that brings you to 434 BC, which, as we said earlier, that was the time of Nehemiah and the building of the wall. Okay, so going backwards in this prophecy from the Hebrew year 5777 or the Gregorian year 2017, if you go back 49 Jubilees, that takes you exactly to where it's talking about the building of the wall of Nehemiah in 434 BC. And as you can see, there's no 7 in this year when you convert it to BC, but it's interesting that it adds up to 7 both ways, frontwards and backwards, when you add the 4 and the 3 together. But when you convert this to Hebrew years, and I'm not sure of the exact dates, I just put some random dates in there, but you can see that the year 434 BC converts to the Hebrew year 3327. So again, you see a number ending with the number 27, which is part of the Jubilee pattern. Now, if you work backwards from the current years and you do the 7 sevens plus the 62 weeks, and altogether that would be 69. So if you do this in Jubilees, then that works out to 3,450 years. And so that would be the year 1434 BC on the Gregorian calendar. So you can see that would be 3,450 years ago. And so I had looked this up years ago, and what I had discovered is that 1434 BC was the year of Joshua's death. And you can see here there's several sources that place the year of Joshua's death at the year 1434 BC. And I didn't realize it at the time that Joshua was a type of the Messiah. The name Jesus is actually the name Joshua in the Old Testament. It's Yeshua. And it says over here that after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. And that's, of course, if you add the 7 weeks to that as well, making it a total of 69 weeks. And that's exactly when the Messiah was cut off. When you work this prophecy to the first coming of the Messiah. But when you work it backwards in Jubilees from the current year and you go back 69 Jubilees, it takes you to the year 1434, which was the year of Joshua's death. But not only that, it was also the year that Jerusalem was retaken. You can see that here in Judges 1. It says, now after the death of Joshua, it came to pass that the children of Israel asked the Lord, saying, who shall go up for us against the Canaanites first to fight against them? And then if you go to verse 8, you see that that is when Jerusalem was taken. And then the other thing that happened at the time of Joshua's death is that that's when Joseph's bones were buried, and this indicated the beginning of the state of Israel, because Joseph had asked that his bones not be buried until the Israelites had entered into the promised land. And it was actually 400 years that Joseph's bones were carried, and I just wanted to verify that. But as you can see, there's some sources here that explain how it took 400 years of carrying Joseph's bones before they finally found a resting place for his bones in the promised land. And so that would be 4 generations based on this article over here. And you can see there's a pattern of 400 years in the Bible. And it talks about that over here. It's interesting that it's in 1 Chronicles 7, chapters 20 through 27. It says it lists 10 generations here. It says this list covers Ephraim to Joshua's father, Nun. Joshua is the 11th name listed here because he represents the generation in the wilderness, 40 years since he leads into the succeeding generation in Canaan land. Hence we see that the 4 generation of names, 4 times 100 equals 400 years, represents the 4 generations in Egypt foretold by God. The 10 generation of names represents the same, but as 10 times 40 equals 400 years, with the following 40 years of the desert wanderings accounted to Joshua. The name Joshua is a variant of the name Yeshua. Okay, so working backwards from this prophecy in terms of Jubilees takes you back, if you go back 69 Jubilees, it takes you to the time of the cutting off of Joshua, which is a type of the Messiah. It takes you to the taking of Jerusalem and to the entering of the Promised Land. And if you convert this year to a Hebrew year, it takes you to the year 2327. So again, you see the pattern of the Jubilee ending in year 27. Now, if you go back the full 70 weeks, and instead of weeks, you do this in terms of Jubilees, because Shavua can be any set of 7. It can be a period of 7 years. It can be a week. It can refer to the Feast of Weeks, which I'll talk about that next. So it can be interpreted as years because the Feast of Weeks or Pentecost comes once a year, so it can be interpreted as years, but it can also be interpreted as weeks of years, as in Jubilees, or a set of 7 times 7 sets of years, or Jubilees. So if you convert this into Jubilees and you go the full 70 Jubilees back from the current year, 2017, or Hebrew year 5777, that would be 3,500 years. As you can see, that's 70 times 50. And so if you go back 3,500 years from the year 2017, that takes you to the year 1484, which would be the year of the Exodus. As you can see, there's several sources that place the year of the Exodus to 1484 BC. And when you convert this to Hebrew years, it takes you to the year 2277, which is like the number 27 amplified, and it also contains the numbers 27 and 77 in it, which is all part of the pattern. And so this pattern ends with verse 27, but when you work it backwards from the current year in Hebrew years, it goes all the way back to the Exodus, if you go back 70 Jubilees, and that takes you to the Hebrew year 2277, which is like the number 27 amplified, and it has both numbers that are part of the pattern within that number. And I've talked about the importance of the number 27 and how it's usually in verse 27 in all 4 of the Gospels, where it talks about the coming of Christ in all his glory. It mentions it in verse 27. You see over here in Matthew 24:27, it says, "For as lightning cometh out of the east, and shineth even unto the west, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be." And then you see a comparable verse in Luke chapter 21 that says the same thing. You see it again in Matthew 16, verse 27. It's talking about the Son of Man coming in all his glory. And then again in the book of Mark, chapter 13, verses 26 through 27. And then in the book of John, chapter 1, verses 25 through 27. It's where John the Baptist is talking about the coming of Christ, and in verse 27 it says, "He it is whose coming after me is preferred before me, whose shoes latchet I am not worthy to unloose." And if you've watched some of my other videos, you know what that means, but I'm out of time, so thanks for watching, and God bless.